Have you ever heard of someone who changed the entire world, but not in a way anyone would want? In today's video, we're diving into the extraordinary and controversial life of Adolf Hitler. Don't worry, this isn't a boring history lecture. I'll tell you his story in simple English, with some surprising, even funny moments along the way. If you love learning English through fascinating stories like this, hit that subscribe button now so you never miss a video. Ready? Let's go all the way back to the beginning, to when Hitler was just a boy with dreams of becoming an artist. This is more than just history. It's a journey to understand why the past still matters today. Let's get started. Adolf Hitler was born a long time ago in 1889. Can you imagine? That's more than 130 years ago. He wasn't from Germany, as many people think. He was actually born in a small town called Braunau in Austria. Braunau is so small that if you sneeze, you might miss it. But why is Hitler so famous? Or let's say, infamous. He became the leader of Germany, and he started a war that changed the world, World War II. His actions hurt millions of people, but his story is very important. Why? Because when we study history, we can learn from it. If we understand what happened in the past, we can make sure not to make the same mistakes in the future. So, in this story, you'll learn about Adolf Hitler's life. We'll talk about his childhood, his dreams of being an artist, his time as a soldier, and how he became one of the most powerful leaders in the world. But don't worry, it's not just about sad things. There are lessons here, and maybe even a few surprising or funny moments. Are you ready to travel back in time and learn some history? Let's start with Chapter 1, Early Life. Chapter 1, Early Life. Now let's dive into Adolf Hitler's early life. To understand his story, we need to start at the very beginning, his childhood. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889, in a small town called Braunau am Inn in Austria. This town is right on the border between Austria and Germany. Imagine a sleepy little village with cobblestone streets, a few shops, and cows grazing in the fields. Sounds peaceful, doesn't it? Little did the world know, one of history's most talked about figures was born there. Adolf's father, Alois Hitler, worked as a customs officer. You know, the people at the border who check your bags to make sure you're not bringing anything illegal. Alois was a strict man. He wanted his children to follow the rules and work hard. Adolf didn't like that very much. He was closer to his mother, Clara, who was kind and loving. She took care of the house, the children, and, of course, young Adolf. As a boy, Adolf was not the easiest child. He didn't like to follow rules, and he didn't enjoy school. He was smart, but only when he wanted to be. One of his teachers said that Adolf had talent, but no discipline. Imagine a boy who could solve a math problem, but didn't want to do homework. That was Adolf. He would sit in class, daydreaming instead of studying. Now, here's something interesting. Young Adolf loved art. Yes, the same Adolf Hitler who became a leader and started a war once dreamed of being an artist. Can you imagine that? Little Adolf would spend hours drawing pictures of castles, houses, and landscapes. He even painted. He was actually pretty good at it, too. His mother was very proud of his art, but his father wasn't. Alois wanted Adolf. to work in a government office like him. This caused a lot of fights between them. When Adolf was about 14, his father passed away. At first, you might think, "Oh, that's so sad." But Adolf didn't seem too upset. Without his father around, he thought he could finally follow his dream of becoming an artist. Unfortunately, life wasn't so simple. When Adolf turned 18, he moved to Vienna, the capital of Austria. Vienna was a big city full of music, art, and history. For an art lover like Adolf, it was like a dream come true. He applied to the Academy of Fine Arts, a very famous art school. He thought, "This is it, my big chance." But guess what? He didn't get in. Not once, but twice. The school said his work wasn't good enough. Ouch, that must have hurt. After failing to get into art school, Adolf's life in Vienna became very hard. He didn't have much money, and sometimes he couldn't even afford food. He lived in small, cheap rooms and did odd jobs to survive. It was during this time that he started thinking a lot about politics. In Vienna, there were people from many different backgrounds, different countries, religions, and languages. Adolf didn't always like this diversity. He started forming ideas about who he thought was better or worse. These ideas would later shape his life in a very serious way. Even though his life was tough, Adolf didn't give up completely. He kept drawing and painting, trying to make a living as an artist. He sold postcards with his art on them. Imagine walking down the street and buying a postcard drawn by Adolf Hitler. Strange, right? But Adolf's dreams of being a famous artist never came true. By his early 20s, he was still struggling. He felt like a failure. He didn't have a steady job. He wasn't famous, and his life wasn't what he imagined. Looking back, you might wonder, what if the art school had accepted him? Would his life have turned out differently? Would history have been different? It's a question we'll never know the answer to. So that's Adolf Hitler's early life. He grew up in a small town, dreamed big, and faced disappointment. He wanted to be an artist, but life took him in another direction. It's a story of dreams, failure, and the choices people make when life doesn't go as planned. Stay with me, because in the next chapter, we'll see how World War I changed everything for Adolf Hitler. Chapter 2. World War I. Now that we know about Adolf Hitler's early life, let's move on to the next chapter, World War I. This was a big event that changed the world, and it also changed Adolf's life forever. When World War I began in 1914, Adolf Hitler was living in Munich, Germany. He was 25 years old and didn't have a steady job or much direction in his life. But when the war started, everything changed. Adolf was excited. Yes, excited. You might wonder, why would someone be excited about war? For Adolf, this was a chance to do something important. He felt that joining the army would give his life meaning. Adolf volunteered to fight for Germany, even though he was not German. Remember, he was born in Austria, but he loved Germany and thought of it as his true home. He joined the Bavarian army, which was part of the German forces, and became a soldier. He was sent to the Western Front, where some of the toughest battles took place. Now, let me tell you a little about life as a soldier in World War I. It wasn't glamorous. Soldiers lived in trenches, long, narrow ditches dug into the ground. The trenches were muddy, cold, and full of rats. Soldiers had to deal with hunger, sickness, and constant danger. It was not a fun time. Adolf, however, seemed to like army life. He followed orders, worked hard, and was very brave. His fellow soldiers thought he was a bit strange, though. He didn't drink alcohol, didn't smoke, and didn't joke around like the others. Instead, he spent his free time reading and thinking. He wasn't very popular, but his officers noticed his dedication. During the war, Adolf worked as a messenger. His job was to carry important messages between the officers and soldiers on the front lines. This was a very dangerous job because messengers had to run across open fields where they could be shot or hit by bombs. Adolf was lucky, or maybe just very brave, because he survived many dangerous missions. He was even awarded 2 medals for bravery, including the Iron Cross, which was a big honor in the German army. But war wasn't all glory for Adolf. In 1916, he was wounded in the leg during a battle. He was sent to a hospital to recover, but as soon as he could walk again, he went back to the front lines. He didn't want to miss the action. In 1918, near the end of the war, Adolf experienced something very frightening. He was temporarily blinded by a gas attack. Can you imagine how terrifying that must have been? For several weeks, he couldn't see. While he was recovering in the hospital, he heard the news that Germany had lost the war. Now this is where Adolf's story takes a turn. When Germany surrendered in 1918, Adolf was heartbroken. He believed Germany was the greatest country in the world, and he couldn't understand how it had lost. Many Germans felt the same way. The country was poor, people were hungry, and everyone was unhappy about losing the war. But Adolf didn't just feel sad. He felt angry. He thought Germany had been betrayed, and he started blaming certain groups of people for the country's problems. After the war, Adolf didn't know what to do next. The army kept him as a soldier for a little while, but eventually he left. He was back to where he started. No job, no money, and no clear path in life. But this time, he had something he didn't have before: strong political beliefs. He believed Germany needed a leader to make it powerful again, and he wanted to be part of that change. World War I was a turning point in Adolf Hitler's life. Before the war, he was just a failed artist with no direction. After the war, he was a man on a mission. He didn't know it yet, but the experiences he had during the war would shape the rest of his life and the history of the world. The next chapter, we'll see how Adolf Hitler went from being an unknown soldier to becoming a leader. Stay with me. It's going to get interesting. Chapter 3. Becoming a Leader. Welcome back. Now we move to a new chapter in Adolf Hitler's life, where things start to get very interesting and a little strange. After World War I, Adolf was no longer just a soldier. He was about to enter the world of politics, even though he had no experience. How does someone go from being a soldier to becoming the leader of a country? Let's find out. After the war, Germany was in big trouble. The country had lost the war, and many people were poor, hungry, and angry. The government, called the Weimar Republic, was weak. People didn't trust it because it couldn't fix the country's problems. For Adolf, this was the perfect time to step in. He was full of anger about the war, and he wanted to make Germany powerful again. But let's start small, because Adolf didn't become famous overnight. In 1919, he joined a tiny political group in Munich. This group had a very long name, the German Workers' Party. Sounds boring, right? But Adolf saw something special in it. The group was talking about things like making Germany strong and blaming certain groups of people for the country's problems. Adolf liked these ideas, and soon he became one of its most active members. Now here's where Adolf's personality comes into play. If there was one thing Adolf was very good at, it was giving speeches. Imagine him standing in a small room, shouting and waving his hands, with everyone watching and listening. He spoke with so much energy and passion that people couldn't look away. Even if you didn't agree with him, it was hard not to be impressed. Slowly, more and more people started coming to hear him talk. By 1920, the group changed its name to something shorter, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, but most people just called it the Nazi Party. Adolf became one of its leaders, and he created the party's symbol, a red flag with a black swastika. This symbol would become one of the most famous and feared in history. Adolf had big plans for the Nazi Party, but in the beginning it was still small. The meetings were held in beer halls, where people would drink beer, listen to speeches, and argue about politics. Can you picture that? A group of people sitting with their mugs of beer listening to Adolf Hitler shout about Germany's future. Strange, right? But it worked. In 1923, Adolf decided to take a big risk. He and the Nazi Party tried to take over the government in a city called Munich. This is known as the Beer Hall Putsch. The plan was simple: march into the city, take control, and then take over all of Germany. Sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? But the plan failed. Badly. The police stopped them, and Adolf was arrested. Adolf was put on trial and sent to prison. Now, you might think this would be the end of his story, but it wasn't. In fact, his time in prison made him even more famous. While he was in jail, he wrote a book called Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle. In the book, he talked about his ideas for Germany and what he thought was wrong with the world. When he got out of prison after just 9 months, he was more determined than ever to lead Germany. Over the next few years, Adolf worked hard to make the Nazi Party bigger and stronger. He traveled around Germany, giving speeches and gaining followers. He promised people that he would give them jobs, make Germany rich, and bring back its power. For many Germans who were tired of being poor and hopeless, these promises sounded very good. By 1933, Adolf's hard work paid off. The Nazi Party became the largest political party in Germany, and Adolf was appointed Chancellor, which is like the Prime Minister. It was a huge moment for him, and a dangerous one for Germany. So how did Adolf Hitler go from being a poor, failed artist to the leader of Germany? It all started with his ability to speak, his determination, and the country's desperate situation after the war. In the next chapter, we'll see what Adolf did as leader of Germany and how it led to one of the darkest times in history. Stay tuned. Chapter 4. World War II. Now we reach the part of Adolf Hitler's story that changed not just Germany, but the entire world. By 1933, Hitler had become the leader of Germany, and soon he had complete control. He promised to make Germany strong again, but his actions led to World War II, a war that caused unimaginable suffering. Let's see how it all happened. When Hitler became the leader of Germany, the country was in bad shape. Many people didn't have jobs, and Germany was still paying for its loss in World War I. Hitler promised to fix everything, and at first, it looked like he did. He built new roads, created jobs, and made the military stronger. Many Germans were happy because their lives were improving. But there was a dark side to all of this. Hitler's plans weren't just about fixing the economy. He had very dangerous ideas about who should live in Germany. He wanted Germany to be a country, only for people he thought were pure Germans. This meant he blamed Jewish people, Roma people, and others for Germany's problems. He passed laws that took away their rights and made life very hard for them. These ideas of hate and division would lead to terrible consequences. By 1939, Hitler wasn't satisfied with just controlling Germany. He wanted more land. He believed Germany needed more space to grow, and he thought it was his right to take it. First, he took over Austria, his birthplace. Then he took a part of Czechoslovakia. The other countries in Europe were worried, but they didn't stop him because they didn't want another war. But Hitler didn't stop. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. This was the final straw. Britain and France declared war on Germany, and World War II began. It was the start of a conflict that would last 6 years and involve countries from all over the world. In the beginning, Germany was very successful in the war. The German army used a new tactic called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. This meant they attacked quickly and with great force, using tanks, airplanes, and soldiers all at once. In just a few months, Germany took over Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and even France. Hitler seemed unstoppable. But as Hitler was fighting on the battlefield, something even worse was happening in secret. During the war, he started what is now known as the Holocaust. Hitler and the Nazis rounded up millions of Jewish people and others they didn't like, sending them to concentration camps. These camps were places of unimaginable suffering. 6 million Jewish people and millions of others were killed. This was one of the darkest and most tragic events in human history. By 1941, Hitler made a big mistake. He decided to invade the Soviet Union, even though Germany was already fighting Britain. The Soviet Union was huge, and its winters were freezing cold. The German soldiers were not prepared for this. At the same time, the United States joined the war after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Now, Germany was fighting against Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States all at once. Slowly, things began to go wrong for Hitler. The German army suffered huge losses in the Soviet Union, especially at the Battle of Stalingrad. The Allies, Britain, the United States, and their partners started pushing Germany back. By 1944, they had landed in France on D-Day, and Germany was losing control of the land it had taken. By early 1945, the war was almost over. Germany was surrounded. The Soviet Union was closing in from the east, and the Allies were coming from the west. Hitler, who had once dreamed of ruling the world, was now hiding in a bunker under the city of Berlin. World War II showed the world the terrible results of hate, greed, and war. It was the most destructive war in history, with over 70 million people losing their lives. And at the center of it all was Adolf Hitler. In the next and final chapter, we'll talk about how Hitler's life came to an end and how the world tried to recover after the war. Stay with me. It's almost over. Chapter 5. The End of Adolf Hitler. Welcome back. This is the final chapter of Adolf Hitler's story, a story that ends in one of the darkest times in history. By 1945, the world was tired of war, and Adolf Hitler's dream of ruling a powerful German empire was crumbling. Let's see how it all came to an end. By the beginning of 1945, the situation for Germany was hopeless. The Allies were advancing from the west, and the Soviet Union was closing in from the east. Cities in Germany were being bombed, food was running out, and people were desperate. Hitler, who had once been full of energy and confidence, was now hiding in a bunker under Berlin, Germany's capital. The bunker was small, dark, and depressing. Imagine being underground while the city above you is being destroyed. Hitler spent his final days there, surrounded by a few close supporters. He rarely went outside and refused to accept that the war was lost. He still gave orders to his generals, but by this point, those orders didn't matter. The German army was too weak to stop the Allies. In April 1945, the Soviet army reached Berlin. The city was under attack, and it was clear that the war would end in just a few days. Hitler decided he didn't want to be captured by the Soviets. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler took his own life in the bunker. He was 56 years old. His wife, Eva Braun, who he had married just one day earlier, also died with him. When the news of Hitler's death spread, people around the world reacted in different ways. For the people who had suffered under his rule, it was a relief. The man who had caused so much pain and destruction was gone. But his death didn't fix everything. The war still wasn't completely over, and the damage he had done was enormous. On May 8, 1945, just a few days after Hitler's death, Germany officially surrendered. This day is now known as VE Day, or Victory in Europe Day. People celebrated in the streets, happy that the war in Europe was finally over. But the world was forever changed. After the war, countries worked together to make sure something like this could never happen again. Leaders from around the world created the United Nations, an organization to promote peace and cooperation. They also held trials called the Nuremberg Trials to punish the top Nazi leaders for their crimes. These trials were a way of saying that actions like Hitler's could not be forgiven or ignored. So what can we learn from Adolf Hitler's story? It's a story of ambition, hate, and destruction, but it's also a lesson. It shows us how dangerous it can be when one person has too much power and spreads ideas of hate. It reminds us to stand up for what is right and to treat others with kindness and respect, no matter where they come from or what they believe. Adolf Hitler's life ended in defeat, but his story is remembered because it changed the world. By studying his life, we can understand the importance of peace, compassion, and the value of working together to build a better future. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. History can be difficult to hear, but it's so important to learn. I hope this story helps you understand why we must always choose love over hate and peace over war. That's the conclusion of Adolf Hitler's life story. But before we finish completely, let's reflect on why it's important to study history. Even when it's difficult or upsetting, history teaches us lessons. By looking at the past, we can understand how people's actions, both good and bad, shape the world. Hitler's story is a warning about what can happen when hatred and prejudice take over. It reminds us of the importance of standing up for fairness and treating everyone equally, no matter their background. At the same time, history shows us how strong people can be. During World War II, many people stood up to Hitler's terrible plans. Ordinary people helped others in need, even when it was dangerous. Countries worked together to fight for freedom and peace. These acts of bravery and kindness inspire us to do the same in our lives today. Now, you've heard the story of a man who changed the world, but not in a good way. However, understanding his life helps us work toward a better future. So as you continue learning English and exploring history, remember, each story teaches us something. And with that knowledge, we can make the world a little brighter. Before we finish, let's take a moment to look at some of the key vocabulary and grammar points from today's lesson. These will help you understand the story better and improve your English skills as you keep learning. Let's dive in. Vocabulary for learners. Let's take a moment to review some important vocabulary we learned today. These words will help you talk about history, people, and events. We talked about people and roles like leader, artist, follower, soldier, and politician. These words describe the different people in Adolf Hitler's story. We also learned places and events like war, country, history, invasion, and Holocaust. These are key words to understand what happened during World War II. For actions and concepts, we discussed words like blame, lose, fight, promise, respect, power, and peace. These words help us talk about what people did and what they believed. Finally, don't forget the time words like before, after, during, and in, for example, in 1939. These are very useful for telling a story in English. Take some time to review these words and their meanings. I encourage you to watch this video again tomorrow or in a few days. This will help you remember the vocabulary and understand the story even better. Grammar for learners. Now let's review some important grammar points from today's lesson. These will help you talk about history and tell stories more clearly in English. First, we used the past simple tense to describe events from the past. This tense is perfect for telling stories and talking about history. For example, we said, he was born in Austria and Germany invaded Poland. Practice using the past tense to share your own stories. Next, we used sequencing words to organize the events in the story. Words like first, then, after that, and in the end help make your storytelling clear and easy to follow. Try using them when you talk or write about a series of events. We also practiced subject-verb agreement to make sure sentences are grammatically correct. For example, He wanted to lead Germany, or they fought in the war. Make sure your subject and verb match. For A2 learners, we introduced the passive voice to describe events without focusing on who did the action. For example, Germany was defeated, or the war was started in 1939. This is a helpful structure to learn as you advance in English. Finally, we used prepositions of time and place, like in 1939 at the end of the war, and in Vienna. These small words are very important for talking about when and where something happened. Take a moment to review these grammar points. Watch this video again in a few days to practice and strengthen your understanding. Grammar is key to telling stories well, so keep practicing and you'll improve quickly. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep believing in the power of kindness and understanding. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Learn English with Stories 365, and join our Facebook group of the same name to connect with other learners like you. Also, I've prepared a special gift for you. A free PDF of the 1,000 most common words in English to help you grow your vocabulary even faster. You can download it using the link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Take care and happy learning.